He's not wrong, the VP chuckled, swirling a $28 glass of Pinot like he'd invented wine. She's basically a glorified secretary who keeps us organized. I didn't drop my fork. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. But inside, something snapped so cleanly I could hear the echo. The word secretary wasn't the insult, it was the way he said it. Lazy smirk, fake charm. That country club undertone like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging I breathed the same air. To my left, Rachel, the client's senior legal counsel, froze mid-bite. She didn't speak, didn't tilt her head, but her eyebrow twitched, just once. That was enough. I'd spent 18 months building rapport with her team, drafting and redrafting the master service agreement, adjusting the escrow terms, locking down compliance triggers no one in our executive suite even bothered to skim. I'd earned her trust, not because I talked big in meetings, but because every dotted I and crossed T in this deal had my fingerprints. And now here I was, smiling politely while our freshly minted VP, Greg my dad's on the board Landon, torched the credibility I'd spent the last 2 years cultivating, because he liked the sound of his own voice bouncing off the walnut paneling in a steakhouse private room. Now would be a great time to say something like, "Hey, if you enjoy stories like this, toss us a like and hit subscribe. 90% of folks listening never do. And honestly, it really keeps the team going over here. All right, back to it." I cut into my undercooked filet and chewed slowly, the way you do when your career is being flattened under a man's ego and there's creme brulee still coming. Rachel glanced my way just briefly like she was waiting to see if I'd correct him. I didn't, that would have made it personal. And what was coming next, that needed to stay professional. The rest of the table laughed. Our CEO fake chuckled along, probably grateful Greg hadn't called me the lunch lady. Even the client's CFO chimed in with a harmless, "Well, I'll need someone to keep the trains running," as if he hadn't just watched a man in a $900 blazer piss on the work of an entire department. But Rachel, she didn't laugh. She finished her wine, said she had an early flight. She didn't even shake Greg's hand when she left. On the ride back, Greg ranted about how he nailed the vibe and how legal totally loves us. I stared out the window, mentally listing the passwords I'd be changing first thing Monday. Real problem wasn't Greg. It was what Greg represented. He was the symptom of a company that thought titles mattered more than trust, that relationships were props, that competence was expendable if someone wore the right watch. I'd watched people like Greg fail upward my entire career. They didn't prepare, they didn't listen. They just waited for someone else to make the coffee and then signed their name on the results. That night, I didn't sleep. I reread the MSA, every clause, especially the one I'd snuck in 6 months earlier, the one about designated officers and custodial chain of access. It wasn't a trap, not yet, but it could be. By Tuesday, I was off all client emails. My name was missing from the next prep meeting invite. When I asked the exec assistant about it, she got cagey and said Greg had streamlined the process. Streamlined. That's the corporate term for you're getting pushed out, but we're not giving you the satisfaction of a pink slip. Then came Thursday morning. My drawer, the one I locked every night with the data escrow key in its tamper-sealed envelope, was open a crack. I stood there for a long time, not touching it, just breathing. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just sat down, logged into our access control system, and pulled the building badge logs. There it was. Badge ID hash 47,321. Greg Landon. Accessed floor 6 at 2:14 a.m. Tuesday, I checked my Outlook. I was at home that night answering questions from legal via Teams, not even in the building. Then I opened the drawer. The envelope looked fine until I held it up to the light. The seal had been lifted, then carefully reapplied. Whoever did it thought they were clever. They didn't realize I logged serial numbers. Inside, the key was still there, physically intact. Legally, that was another story. The first sign was silence. Not the dramatic kind, no slammed doors or angry memos, just absence. Like someone slowly turning down the volume on a song you didn't realize you loved until it vanished. Monday morning, I logged into my inbox expecting the usual project timelines, red-line drafts from the client's counsel, security posture notes that needed rephrasing so Greg could pretend he wrote them. But the thread with Rachel's team was gone, or rather, it was continuing without me. My name wasn't in the to or CC, just Greg, our clueless VP, and one of the interns I'd been mentoring, who still confused compliance review with calendar invite. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone forgot to loop me in. But then I checked the document trail. Someone had uploaded a fresh version of the deliverables checklist to the shared folder when I hadn't touched. I opened it. My formatting was stripped. My annotations gone, but the structure was mine. Greg had taken my draft, removed my comments, and submitted it under his initials. He was rebranding my work as his. That's when the real gut pull started. The kind of suspicion that makes your skin itch from the inside out. I'd seen this before. Not just the casual erasure, but the groundwork of sabotage. Death by slow deletion. By Wednesday, the weekly client sync I always led gone. Internal alignment only, Greg said, waving it off. I caught him in the hallway afterward. "You good?" I asked, casual as coffee. Always he smiled, just trying to declutter the process. You're swamped anyway, right? Funny how decluttering only seems to involve the women who know where the damn fire extinguishers are. Thursday, my desk drawer was ajar again. Not wide, just enough. Just like the last time, it was a kind of precision that didn't come from clumsiness, it came from confidence. The confidence of someone who thinks consequences are for interns and HR assistants, not for men who play golf with the CEO. I didn't touch it, didn't even pretend to check if anything was gone. I already knew what was inside. That envelope, that key. The same one Greg had no business even breathing near. My fingers itched to grab it, shove it in my bag, take it home, but that would have made me the breach. Instead, I walked to the kitchenette, poured stale coffee into a cup that said world's okayest boss, and sat down like nothing was wrong. That's the trick, isn't it? Stay still when the trap is baited. Let them think you're clueless. Let them dig their own grave with a titanium shovel. Back at my desk, I started the real work, quietly pulling the access logs for the week. There it was again, 2:14 a.m., Tuesday. Greg's badge, elevator to floor 6. 37 minutes in the building. That envelope hadn't just been fondled. It had been photographed, opened, closed again with tweezers and cheap confidence. And here's the part that made my stomach clench with something colder than rage. He thought he got away with it. That same afternoon, he forwarded me an email chain I'd normally be leading, with a chirpy little "just looping you in, Anna," as if I were a temp who forgot to RSVP to the potluck. I opened the thread, read every word. The client was asking about our escrow protocol. Rachel's name was in the CC. Greg replied with some fluff about secure vaulting mechanisms and tiered access policies. Corporate soup. But one sentence made me exhale through my teeth. We maintain tight chain of custody controls, limited to senior technical staff only. He had no idea what he'd just done. That one sentence, that was a declaration. And if Rachel knew what I suspected she did, she was already archiving it. By Friday, the intern he'd looped in was in my seat at the weekly alignment call. Not literally, but metaphorically, oh yeah, she was taking notes, smiling, nodding. Greg called her a rising star. I called her 19, terrified and underpaid. Still, I smiled, said nothing. Because here's the thing about compliance, it's not a sword, it's a trapdoor. And once you hear it click beneath your feet, it's already too late to run. Friday night, 11:03 p.m. I sat alone in the glow of two monitors, sipping stale office coffee like it was aged whiskey. Most sane people were asleep, or at a bar, or tucked into Netflix reruns. Me? I was combing through building security logs like a detective in orthopedic pumps. And there it was again. Badge hash 47,321. Accessed floor 6 at 2:14 a.m. Tuesday. Duration, 37 minutes. That badge belonged to Greg. His access level didn't cover anything beyond his own floor after hours, but apparently no one told the badge scanner. Or maybe someone did, and that someone liked to believe rules were for the help. Technically, only two people were authorized to handle the physical escrow key stored in my drawer. Me and the CEO, no one else. That authorization was listed explicitly in the Master Service Agreement. Section 14.2c, I had written it. Rachel had co-signed it. Greg, he didn't even know it existed, and now his greasy little golf pro fingers had been all over it. I opened the drawer again, gently like I was handling a bomb. The envelope looked the same at first, still sealed, still bearing the time-stamped custody sticker I applied every Friday. But under the desk lamp, the edges didn't sit flush, like someone had peeled it back and tried to press it closed with a warm spoon. I held it up. The sticker had been slick clean, then re-adhered, sloppy, arrogant. A surgeon with shaky hands and no scrub nurse. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just logged into the facility's request portal and opened a ticket requesting timestamped CCTV pull for floor 6, hallway and break room entrances, window, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock a.m. Tuesday. Compliance spot check per annual MSA audit. I chose my words carefully. No alarm bells, just another box to check. Let them assume I was building documentation for some boring internal review. Let Greg keep peacocking around like he hadn't already triggered the exact clause that could vaporize our biggest deal, and vaporize him with it. The footage request would ping Carl in facilities, an underpaid former Marine with a thing for black licorice and mechanical pencils. Carl liked me because I once helped his daughter craft a resume. He wouldn't ask questions, he'd just send the clip. Still, I felt my chest tighten, not fear, something sharper, like that feeling right before a car crash when you know the hit is coming but you've got just enough time to choose where you'll land. I kept thinking about Rachel, the way she hadn't laughed, the way she left that dinner like something was unfinished. I wondered if she already knew, if she was testing me, or giving me space to handle it before she did. And Greg? He was now replying to emails like he was born in a suit, thanking the client for their faith in his leadership. Using phrases like, as we discussed, when I was the one who'd discussed it. All of it. Every clause, every risk matrix, every late-night call patching gaps he wouldn't recognize if they bit him on his Vineyard Vines khakis. He thought he was bulletproof, invincible, the kind of man who believes HR is just a department that plans holiday parties and hides harassment complaints. So I smiled, waved in meetings, even complimented his asinine PowerPoint theme, innovate, integrate, elevate, like he generated it by shaking a bag of buzzwords over a copier. But privately, documented, I logged. I printed everything: his badge history, my sealed custody chain, screenshots of our MSA clause, a fresh notarized timestamp of the envelope's original seal. I stapled it together, labeled it Exhibit A Potential Custody Breach. No one saw me slip it into a black envelope that Friday night. No one saw me carry it to my trunk under a cloudy sky and store it under the floorboard. No one saw me breathe out, slow, long, like I was letting go of the last illusion that this would fix itself. It wouldn't, and that was the gift. Because when people like Greg set a fire, they never stop to wonder if the room is full of gas. Monday morning came wearing the skin of professionalism, but it stank of panic sweat and last-minute PowerPoints. The internal prep meeting for the final client review was held in Conference Room B, which always smelled faintly like sour cream and betrayal. I showed up early, not to be polite, but to control the seating chart. From the far end of the table, I could see every screen, every page, every bead of nervous sweat. Greg walked in late, of course, holding a cold brew and wearing that smug, half-limp smile that only men with inherited job titles seem to master. He slapped his laptop down like it owed him rent and immediately launched into what he called the final security posture briefing. The deck was a Frankenstein of phrases he'd harvested from older versions of my work, like someone feeding my past reports into ChatGPT and asking for CEO-safe jargon. Slide 3 hit, and I saw it coming like a slow train. Greg, puffed up like a Thanksgiving float, started walking the room through our chain of custody protocols. As outlined in Clause 14, he said, tapping the remote like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a lawsuit, access to the data escrow key is limited to authorized personnel under quarterly audit review. I didn't even blink. Actually, I said lightly, like I was correcting a dinner menu typo, Clause 14.2c specifically designates physical key access to named officers only, not general personnel. Audit review is semi-annual, not quarterly. The clause exists because the client's legal team required a tighter compliance perimeter after the 2020 vendor breach. Greg froze mid-sip. Everyone else just blinked and stared at the table like their name badges might save them. He slowly turned his head toward me, his smile drained into something tighter, darker. The kind of look a man gives when he realizes his sandbox has a rattlesnake in it. Oh, he said, fake chuckling, that's right. Thanks, Anna. Good catch. I smiled, of course. What I didn't say was, you quoted the wrong version of the clause. You don't even know the document you're pretending to own. He continued on, but his rhythm was broken. He stumbled on slide 5, forgot to plug the HDMI cable all the way in, and when his screen flickered out, it was like the air conditioning kicked in full blast. A room that had been filled with self-congratulation and click-happy confidence now sat in pin-drop silence. I leaned back and crossed my legs. See, the thing about people like Greg is they overreach. Always. Give them rope and they don't just hang themselves. They build a gallows, invite the press, and live stream it with a brand hashtag. Every misquoted clause, every document he forged forward, every deleted CC line on client threads. It was all ammunition now. He was a man building his own coffin with the blueprints I'd buried under fake smiles and polite corrections. He didn't know about the envelope. He didn't know I had already handed a sealed evidence packet to Rachel. He didn't know that Rachel had responded with a one-word email, received. He didn't know that Rachel's firm didn't bluff. And I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. Let him walk into the room thinking he was the architect of our security posture. Let him print the documents I wrote, misquote the clauses I negotiated, and plagiarize the policies I spent nights crafting while he was busy approving branded hoodies for the onboarding team. The higher he climbed, the more delicious the fall. At the end of the meeting, Greg clapped his hands together and said, "Well, I think we're in a really strong place. The client's going to love this." I nodded. They certainly won't forget it. I gathered my planner, which still had the original clause notes scribbled in the margins, and walked out before anyone could say another word. My heels clicked on the tile like a countdown. Tick, tick, tick. The folder weighed nothing, but it felt like it could crack the earth open. Black matte cardstock sealed with a single red sticker. Inside, one printed access log, one high-res still from Tuesday's security footage, one notarized chain of custody ledger signed and timestamped, and one short cover memo with my initials and nothing more. It didn't need drama. Facts were the drama. I didn't send it via courier. I didn't email it. I hand-delivered it personally without notice at 8:13 a.m. Wednesday to Rachel's office in the client's glass and steel downtown tower. She didn't look surprised when I stepped into her doorway. She didn't offer coffee or small talk. Just locked eyes with me, stood, and shut the door behind us. I placed the folder on her desk like a confession and stepped back. She opened it without a word, scanning quickly. Her gaze lingered on the still frame, a grainy but clear image of Greg's pale, deer-in-the-headlights face lit by the motion sensor light as he stood outside my office door at 2:14 a.m., hand mid-reach toward the sealed drawer. Rachel didn't blink, didn't sigh, didn't ask questions. She closed the folder gently and looked at me. "Understood," she said. "We'll handle it." That was it. No theatrics, no whispered promises of retribution. Just 3 syllables, and from Rachel, that was louder than a siren. I nodded once, turned, and left her office. As I stepped back into the elevator and watched the doors close, I felt it settle inside me, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control, not hope, not peace. Just control. The trap was set, the trigger wired. All I had to do was wait for him to walk straight into it with his wingtips polished and his ego leading the way. Back at our office, the air practically fizzed with false optimism. The CEO was in rare form, pacing the floor with the anxious joy of a man who thought a $120 million contract would finally silence the whispers about his underwhelming strategic vision. I passed him in the hallway, and he grinned like a kid on Christmas Eve. "Big week," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like I was a mascot. "We're days away. This is going to put us on the map." I smiled. "Just make sure the coordinates are right." He laughed, not getting it, or pretending not to. Either way, he kept walking. And Greg? Greg had graduated from strutting to practically floating. He passed my desk twice that day without a single word, just humming some unplaceable yacht rock tune and sipping a smoothie the color of roadkill. He'd started wearing cufflinks, for God's sake. Cufflinks. Like he thought he was going to be featured in Forbes for stealing other people's work and tampering with legal documents at 2 a.m. He scheduled a client victory readiness huddle for Thursday. Invited the entire exec team, marked it mandatory. I got the invite and almost laughed. Victory, that word again. They used it like it meant something. Like winning a deal erased the blood trail it took to get there. I spent that afternoon doing what Greg never would have imagined, mentoring the intern he was grooming to replace me. She was smart, raw, and scared. I showed her where the emergency shutdown keys were kept, how to spot a contract clause that's a trap in disguise, and the 3 words never to use in a vendor negotiation. It should be she didn't understand the weight of it yet. But someday she would. Hopefully in a job where men like Greg weren't given keys they couldn't spell. By 5 p.m., I had a second copy of the folder in my bag and a backup flash drive in my locker. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. When I passed the break room, I heard Greg on the phone, laughing too loud. "I mean, she's detail-oriented," he said, "but she's not exactly leadership material." I didn't stop walking, didn't stiffen, just made a mental note. He was aiming the weapon now, and he still didn't know the safety was off. The boardroom looked like a magazine spread about wealth no one enjoys. Glass walls, $900 ergonomic chairs, tiny bottles of still and sparkling water in perfect rows, like a hydration hostage situation. Someone had catered from that overpriced place downtown, the kind with tiny truffle sandwiches that tasted like regret and rosemary. The client execs were already seated when I walked in. I took my place at the far end of the table, behind a carafe of black coffee and beside a notepad I'd never need to write on. My badge barely clicked as I sat. That was intentional. I wanted to enter like a breeze, not a storm. Greg, of course, made an entrance like a game show host. Navy blazer, no tie, one of those slim-fit shirts that scream midlife crisis but make it marketable. He swaggered in 5 minutes late, carrying exactly 0 documents, sipping on something cold and green. "Hey, hey, big day," he said to the room like he personally discovered electricity. "Excited to get this thing inked." The CEO laughed, too loud, his face flushed with anticipation and sodium. "Let's show our partners what a real team looks like." I folded my hands in my lap and studied the curve of Rachel's brow. She sat near the center, calm but tight, the same quiet she wore when I handed her the envelope. Next to her sat the client's CTO, arms folded, light smile frozen like a screensaver. No one reached for the croissants. Greg clicked the remote and started presenting, slides he hadn't written, filled with words he barely understood. "Our security team's discipline has been the cornerstone of this engagement," he began. "We've implemented a rigorous chain of custody model to ensure zero unauthorized access to sensitive assets. Only top-tier executives have physical touchpoints with critical materials." I could practically hear the noose tightening. He continued, reading off bullet points I'd personally crafted months ago, but stripped now of context, nuance, and legality. He was performing trust instead of proving it. His voice smooth, hands animated, confidence riding shotgun with ignorance. Every time he said "we," I imagined a courtroom transcript reading Greg Landon, VP of Strategy, under oath. Rachel remained still, her pen uncapped but untouched. Greg moved to the next slide, something about end-to-end encryption, and I saw the CTO shift slightly in his chair. Not discomfort, recognition. He'd seen this song and dance before, probably in some other boardroom, right before a vendor blew up in their face. "I mean, we take access control very seriously," Greg went on, adjusting his collar like the heat was finally setting in. "There's a reason we've never had a breach. We're just built different." The CEO beamed like a man watching his son graduate. The CFO gave a little clap. I watched Rachel's eyes flick to the left to her assistant, who gave the subtlest nod. And I knew this wasn't a presentation. This was a countdown. I poured myself half a cup of coffee and sipped it slowly. My pulse didn't move. My breath stayed steady, not from detachment but from calculation. I'd already run this simulation in my head 100 times. I knew the next 4 moves, I just didn't know how fast they'd fall. Greg, drunk on the sound of his own voice, landed the final slide like he was delivering a baby. We're excited to move forward, he said, grinning like a man about to land a text invite. This partnership marks a new era of trust. And that was when Rachel finally moved. She closed her notebook with one hand, lifted a slim black folder with the other. Then she looked at me, not Greg, not the CEO, me. And I gave her the smallest nod imaginable. Let it happen. The click of pens uncapping echoed like starter pistols. Final contracts rested neatly in front of each executive, paper thick enough to make trees weep. The CEO leaned forward, already reaching for his Mont Blanc with all the grace of a man seconds from a dopamine flood. Greg adjusted his cuffs, glanced around the room like he expected applause, and rested his hand beside the signature block with a practiced smirk. Let's make history, he said, all teeth. Rachel didn't move. Instead, she reached into her sleek leather folio and with surgeon precision pulled out a single printed photo. No dramatics, no raised voice. Just movement, measured and deliberate. She placed it face up on the table, just left of the dotted line, angled perfectly toward the CEO. Before we proceed, she said, voice calm as lake water before a lightning strike, can anyone explain why your VP was handling the physical key to our data escrow account at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday morning? Silence detonated. The kind of silence that drops the air pressure in a room, that makes everyone suddenly too aware of their own heartbeat. The CEO froze, hand inches above the page. Greg, mid-breath, let it out like he'd been slapped. What? He said, his voice catching. Rachel tapped the image lightly with her index finger. This still was pulled from your internal security footage. We received it directly from your facility's management team. Time-stamped. Verified. Greg leaned in slowly, the color draining from his face like ink in water. His eyes darted to me for a flicker of a second, then back to the photo. There he was, plain as day, hunched near my drawer, wearing the same ridiculous fleece vest he bragged about getting comped at a golf tournament. One hand reaching forward, caught by the hallway's motion sensor. 2:14 a.m., bold in the corner. I don't, he began, but the CEO cut in. What is this? He barked, glaring at Greg, his voice sharp and rising. You were in the office. At 2 in the morning? I was just, Greg tried again. His tongue fumbling over itself like a bad actor, dropped into a courtroom drama with no script. Rachel, unbothered, looked to the CTO. As per Section 14.2c of the MSA, unauthorized access by a non-designated officer to physical escrow materials constitutes a breach. We documented the chain of custody protocol ourselves. Your own policy names only 2 authorized individuals. Neither are him. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe too loudly. Greg opened his mouth again, but nothing useful came out. Just stammering syllables and the quiet unraveling of a man who thought the rules only applied to people with smaller business cards. Rachel shifted her gaze to the CEO. So, would you like to explain this breach on the record before we proceed? Or should we table signatures until legal reviews our next steps? The CFO coughed into his sleeve. One of the junior partners began quietly sliding the signature packets back into a manila folder. The entire table turned from celebration to containment zone in under 6 seconds. And Greg, he sat back blinking, not blinking like a man shocked, blinking like a man calculating how fast he could lawyer up. The CEO turned toward him, voice a whisper meant to sound like a scream. Did you touch that key? Greg didn't answer, because what could he say? Evidence was on the table, his fingerprints on the drawer, and the contract, what should have been his coronation, was now a ticking bomb. I just watched. My pulse was steady, my hands still folded. There was no smugness in my silence, no gloating. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability finally arriving in a room that had locked the door against it for years. Rachel placed the photo back in her folder, crisp and silent. Then she looked at the CEO one last time. You take escrow very seriously, she said. I'm sure you understand. Rachel didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't even look angry. That was the worst part for them. She spoke with the surgical stillness of someone who'd already anticipated every excuse, every deflection, every pathetic grasp at dignity. As stated clearly in Section 14.2c of the Master Service Agreement, she said, sliding a second page across the table, highlighted, printed, signed. Initialed by both parties, unauthorized physical access by a non-designated officer to escrow-secured material constitutes a material breach. That clause is not discretionary, nor is it open to interpretation. Her tone was firm, almost bored, like she delivered this kind of news before, just never in a room this expensive. Our general counsel has reviewed the security logs and footage. The violation is clear. Effective immediately, this contract is void. Furthermore, under the same section, your organization is liable for breach penalties, including exposure of our systems to uncontrolled access risk. We will be initiating formal proceedings to recover damages. The words didn't just land, they detonated. The CEO, who seconds ago was grinning like a prom king, looked like a man whose yacht just hit a sandbar and cracked in two. Wait, he said, holding up a palm like he could stop the sky from falling. There's got to be some kind of misunderstanding here. This is an internal matter. We can correct it. This doesn't need to derail the deal. Rachel blinked once. We're not in the business of correcting your security failures. We're in the business of avoiding them. I watched the blood drain from Greg's face like water through a leaky valve. His voice, once so smug and elastic, was now thin as printer paper. I didn't mean to, I was just checking, I thought maybe. Intent is not a clause in our contract, Rachel replied, already standing. Her team followed suit, not frantically, efficiently. Smooth as a wind down. The CEO still stammered, his hand flailing toward the documents like he could will the deal back into existence. Let's not be hasty, he said, face shiny now with a panic sheen. We're prepared to offer concessions, additional audits even. Concessions don't unring a bell, Rachel cut in. You had custody violations. You had unauthorized access. And you had someone sitting in this very room lie to our faces about security protocol. We're finished here. And just like that, they were gone. Folders zipped, pens pocketed, chairs quietly pulled back from the polished table. Rachel didn't look at Greg again. She didn't need to. He was already folding in on himself like a dying star. The CEO stood there like someone had slapped him with a restraining order and a calculator at the same time. We'll respond legally, he muttered, more to the floor than to anyone in particular. My hands were folded. I kept them there. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't need to. This wasn't gloating. This wasn't payback. It was just truth, finally said aloud in a language they couldn't talk over. Rachel paused by the door and glanced back at me. Just once. Then she nodded and left. The silence that followed was swamp-thick. Greg stared straight ahead like blinking might trigger spontaneous combustion. The CEO looked at him with a mix of fury and dawning dread, the kind of expression that only appears when you realize the dumbest person in the room might have just cost you everything. I looked down at my lap and exhaled, not in relief. In release, every microaggression, every meeting I'd been excluded from, every time they called me detail-obsessed like it was a flaw, every thin smile I'd worn like armor. It all dissolved in that moment, not with a scream, not with a slap, just a contract voided in full daylight and a trail of wreckage left where Greg's swagger used to be. No one spoke, no one even moved, and I just sat there, still, silent, and free. 72 hours later, the walls were bleeding. Investor calls started before the client team's Uber had even hit the freeway. First, a concerned voicemail. Then 3 back-to-back emails flagged urgent. By the next morning, legal was on a warpath, and by afternoon, the board had convened an emergency session, code for who do we throw under the bus before the street cameras roll. By the end of day 2, Greg was temporarily suspended pending internal investigation. His calendar disappeared. His Slack went silent. His name vanished from the leadership team's slide on the company homepage like someone had Control-Z'd his whole career. No press release, no explanation, just a hole where his LinkedIn updates used to be. The CEO tried to spin it as proactive compliance strengthening, but no one bought it. Not the board, not the investors. Certainly not the remaining clients who quietly began pulling back, asking questions, auditing contracts that had never been touched before. The whole facade, polished, cocky, untouchable, had cracked, and now it creaked with every step. Me, I spent those days exactly how they didn't expect. I didn't gloat, didn't leak anything to the press, didn't even update my resume. I just kept showing up on time, calm, focused, clearing my desk of clutter, closing out accounts, archiving my process notes so the next poor soul wouldn't have to rebuild Rome from ashes. Nobody asked where I was going. Nobody dared. On the morning of day 3, a new message pinged my personal inbox. Simple, direct, from Rachel W. Subject, Opportunity Body. There's a role here for someone who understands real trust. Let me know if you're open to a conversation. I stared at it for a long moment, then closed my laptop. No rush. And you've already won. Time becomes your plaything. That afternoon, I poured the last of my cold office coffee into my chipped ceramic mug, one Greg used to mock for being Grandma Core. I slid my worn planner into my tote bag, the one with years of margin notes, red lines, and post-its that held more operational knowledge than any VP could fake on a quarterly call. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the darkened screen of Greg's abandoned monitor. No makeup, no armor, just me, quiet still, standing, no send-off, no forced goodbyes, no cake in the break room with stale balloons and pity applause. Just the hum of the HVAC, the dull click of my heels on tile, and the whisper of justice woven into silence. I walked past the conference room, empty now but still echoing with the ghosts of that moment. The photo, the question, the contract killed in its crib. I reached the elevator, pressed the button. Behind me, the office kept breathing, unaware it had just been restructured at the molecular level. The power games, the smirks, the whispered she's just, all of it erased by one clause, one truth, and one woman who knew when not to shout. The doors opened. I stepped inside, and as they slid shut, I smiled just a little. The kind of smile you earn, quiet, final, like a signature on the last page of a deal they never saw coming. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.